I never saw myself as a businessman, as an entrepreneur. Like that was never a thing.
When people ask me what I do, I find it quite hard to give my job role.
I always liked leading, whether it was at university, at school, in the basketball team or whatever it may be.
I don't think in any other job apart from a startup, you'd be asked to come and get in front of a camera and do a podcast.
Obviously, it's nothing against, Lionel Messi, but it's kind of when you start comparing the greats, nobody's denying that he's one of the greats.
Yeah.
But, when you go into, well, who's the GOAT of all time, right?
But you could say when Ronaldinho was playing that the people around him were all going out after games and drinking and smoking and their fitness wasn't great.
Yeah, well, that's why it's generational as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's hard to compare those things. But anyway, what I did want to talk about today, being that we are called Startup Dynamics, being a startup itself, and the fact that we're doing this kind of two perspective from an employee and a founder, and that this is our second episode, right?
Yeah.
It kind of makes sense to start with not only how, but like what kind of person it takes to start a startup.
Okay.
And from your perspective, actually, what does it take to join a startup? Because I've never really, joined a startup, and it is, risky as well as somebody to start one, right? And I think it's really important to talk about these things like in today's world, solely because entrepreneurship as a whole is becoming so popularized, and it feels like everybody wants to have that in their Instagram bio, right? Yeah. And just, follow Gary Vee or whatever other, star, I guess you can call it, right? Influencer that's in the business space. And when it's glamorized that much, I think it's very important to clarify not only what goes into starting a startup, but like what's the kind of mindset you need to have and what to expect. And especially like from my perspective, I never saw myself as a businessman, as an entrepreneur. Like that was never a thing.
Yeah.
But there was something there. And I think for me, the biggest thing was not being afraid to take risks, right? And I think that's probably the biggest thing where people say they're, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm going to start a business, but they're essentially just one-man bands and that they're freelancers, right? Yeah. But they register as an agency and look at me, right? What I'm talking about is like legitimately, you put in all your eggs basically in one basket, you put all your money in there, you employ people then depend on you to actually generate revenue, generate money, pay the salaries and stuff like that. Once you go into that, it's at a completely different level.
So right? what age were you when that happened?
So it went in stages, right? So the first time I started was, it was about 23, 24.
Okay.
Something like that. And that was a complete kind of leap of faith where I put all the money and more than I had into this. The only kind of thing was that I didn't really have employees. We hired a development agency, right? And because I didn't have a lot of money to spare, the agency that we hired was not great. But besides the point, I would work a 9-to-5 job.
Yeah.
Take as little money as I can from it for rent and food and stuff like that, and then everything else plus loans would go into the business.
Right. Okay.
Right. And to be fair, for a lot of people, and actually, a lot of friends around me and people I spoke to, that sounds absolutely mental, right? Why would you even do that, right? Especially that, like, one of the things is that nobody really, or very little people will believe in your idea in the beginning until you really succeed. Then everybody goes, oh, right, yeah, I thought of that too, right? So in the beginning, if I had to kind of pin down kind of a few character traits that you would need.
Yeah.
So high risk tolerance, definitely.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Solely because things will go wrong, and basically it all ends with you. Like, there's nobody to turn to, there's nobody to ask, there's nobody higher than you. It all stops with you. So you really have to be confident and passionate about what you're doing, which I guess would be point 2. Because without that, sometimes even naive confidence and passion, you wouldn't go through those tough times as easy. Well, not easy, but a lot of people will fall down if they don't have the passion for it, right? You sometimes really need to grind it out. And that would be kind of the final straw that you kind of just hang it on to. And then just patience is another thing.
Okay.
I like to call it aggressive patience. So, you still, speed kills in startups, because it goes very quickly, and that's one of the advantages of having a startup. But you do have to be patient, because it is, at the end of the day, a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Yeah, and I think from my perspective as an employee, I'd agree with those 3 points, especially, so the first point you made about it being a risk, I definitely agree with that. When I first joined, in my mind, I was like, well, I could be in a job for 3 months, because there's absolutely no job security here.
Yeah.
Because at the moment we're not making any money. Like, everything depends on the product going well.
Yeah.
But I think from me being an employee and you being a founder, what we also have to take into account is that I'm 22. At the time I was 21.
Yeah.
It was my first ever job. So for me, it wasn't a big risk, because I didn't have much to lose.
Yeah.
And the potential for joining a startup and being the 4th or 5th employee in a company, rather than going wherever and being the 1000th employee, the potential for me to have a great career from that was outweighed the risk of it not going well.
Yeah, not all startups are equal as well. You have to, I would imagine, as an employee or somebody looking to join a startup, you do need to do your vetting and your research to some extent, just to know, where is the money actually coming from? How much runway do we actually have? What is the safety? What is the structure? Because I remember when you just joined, your expectation was that there's basically zero structure. We just come in and just we try and figure it out.
Yeah.
When in reality, the way we were set up, the fact that we failed once already, but we kind of came back with the same people and stuff like that. We had a lot of stuff figured out already, so there was a structure. So I think, in the environment that you came in, it wasn't as early stage startup-y as some early stage startups would be. Because I think when you're saying early stage, that's just being in somebody's basement or just being in coffee shops and just trying to figure it out.
So the first time I ever spoke to you was over the phone.
Yeah.
Just initially trying to get my opinion on the job.
Yeah.
And when you said it's 2 people working in an office in Manchester, and the way you were talking, I thought, okay, you must have maybe graduated a year ago.
Yeah.
I didn't have the impression that it would be such a kind of professional, everyone knew what you were doing, and also you had kind of this long-term plan.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just you were making it up as you went along.
Yeah.
And this frantic energy, it was more kind of planned out. And I suppose that's my impression of a startup before I joined compared to now. It is completely different. But I get your point, as every startup will probably be different, because I don't want to put words into your mouth, but you've probably gained experience through your early career of working for companies and being able to transfer that into your own startup, compared to, say, someone like me who could leave university and then just go and try to start his own startup.
Yeah.
I think that's completely different.
Yeah, and you you go through phases, because, when I first time started, so when 24 or something like that, right? I remember we did employ one person that wasn't like, an agency or anything like that. And that was completely, it was dodgy, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like we had zero systems. Like we just Googled a contract. We paid the guy, I think, through PayPal, and it's just, it was very, you just figured it out as you go, right? And the fact that I did work for a company before, and they had payroll, and they had all these things in place. It's just that when you're literally just starting, you just don't have those. You don't have access to those, and you don't have those resources. Right. So it is quite hard to find people that you just go and say, right, this is the contract, but essentially means nothing. And we're going to be paying you through PayPal, hopefully every month. That is a tough sell, but you do kind of have to go through, well, you don't have to, but a lot of startups do go through that. I do think it's getting better solely because, as I mentioned earlier, kind of entrepreneurship and startup culture is growing and growing rapidly. And so there are a lot more support, there are a lot more tools available that are already kind of, everything's ready for you, just like pay a membership or something like that, and actually take care of everything for you, right? So those tools were simply not available for me like 6 years ago, right?
And well, to be fair, our startup is kind of joined with a wider company who have those things in place. As a founder, I'm guessing you wouldn't enjoy having to do those type of things, like the admin work and
No, I definitely wouldn't. But it's again, it's one of those things where you do what you have to, right? And I think in the beginning, you do a lot of things that you don't like until you reach a point where you can delegate enough, right?
Because in my opinion, a startup begins because someone has an idea that they want to get into market or whatever. But they don't really think about that kind of stuff, the employing people, kind of being a leader.
Well, you say that, but at the same time, so you don't really think about employing people per se. I think when you're just starting out, you don't really use that word. But what you do think about and what you do use, like, we need to build a team, which is essentially that, right? The only thing is that, a lot of times that's, it's not like when you join, we're all set up, you get a salary and stuff like that, you get a proper contract, you get benefits and all those things. If you were to have joined a lot earlier, for example, when in the first one with the one we failed, it would have been literally a case of, well, we could pay you something, but here's some equity for you from the get-go, kind of to support the fact that we can't pay you market rate or something like that, right? So in the beginning, you do pay through sweat equity more than anything.
And that, to be clear, that is a percentage of the company?
Yeah, exactly. So the founding team, obviously, depending on how it's structured, you get overall you got 100%. You just allocate based on whatever the criteria is, whether it's input, whether it's work, sweat equity, which is basically work, whether it's investment, which is money, and stuff like that. So in the beginning, we were literally, right, there's three of us, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this, let's split it basically 3 ways. We knew, for example, the one person will be doing a bit more than the other one. So it ended up being like 40, 30, 30, right? So, and kind of rewarding your other employees or your team members or just like people that are early on with equity, I think is a smart thing to do, especially if you can't afford kind of paying the market rate. But again, there is a flip side to it where a lot of times I've seen people come in, they expect market rate or more, and then plus equity as well. And that's just simply not basically how it works, right? So because with startups, you do have to kind of give something away, really.
And while I love kind of working for a startup, I could never imagine myself starting my own.
Why not?
Because of having to manage that side of it, all the admin, the dealing with people, the wages. If someone came up to me asking for a pay rise, I'd find it hard to be like, actually, no, you don't deserve that, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it is one of the hardest things to do, to be honest.
Yeah. And even employing someone, trying to work out in an interview whether or not someone is a kind of a good fit for the role, whether what they're saying is kind of bullshit or if they're actually genuinely invested in the company.
Yeah.
So one of the main reasons why I joined this company is because I thought the idea behind the app was great, and that's kind of the main reason for me. I could see it having the potential to do well.
Yeah. I think so. So there's two things I wanna touch on based on what you just said, right? There's a thing that's called Intrepreneurs, right?
Okay.
So do you know what that is?
Well, I know this. So an entrepreneur
Intrapreneur, right?
Okay,
so intrapreneur is basically somebody that's entrepreneurial. So it has all the kind of skill set that you need from an entrepreneur, but they are integrated within an established company already.
Yeah.
And they, for example, take care of a product within it and try to build it. And so if it's Google, somebody's responsible for building Gmail, right? And it's a completely separate product, and like it sits within the company. So if the most straightforward thing that I could say about that is an entrepreneur is an entrepreneur without putting in the money. Right. So basically an entrepreneur would always kind of respect the entrepreneur because he's or she is having the bigger risk because they're putting in the money, but you still have kind of the skill set to do all those things, right? So that's usually, the third, fourth, fifth person within like a company that then becomes big. If you look at somebody like Steve Ballmer from Microsoft, right, who owns Los Angeles Clippers right now, he was employed by Steve Jobs.
Right.
As I think a fourth or fifth employee, and now he's a like multi-billionaire, right?
Yeah.
And he doesn't give a damn that he's not the one that created Microsoft, right? Not Steve Jobs, sorry, Bill Gates. But that's exactly the thing. So I think in today's world, the fact that everybody wants to be an entrepreneur just because it's popular can be a bit. I don't think it's a good thing, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Do you think there's too many people?
I think too many people are trying to, and too many people are getting hurt. Too many people are getting then depressed and losing things, whether it's money, whether it's relationships and stuff like that, solely because it's not what they expected. It's not what social media told them. It's not what they read in some books.
Well, I've got a stat here that over 50% of startups in the UK don't get past the fifth year.
Yeah.
And I think that was definitely my impression or my stereotype of a startup.
Yeah.
That most of them are likely to fail.
And that's exactly that. So this is where kind of the high risk tolerance and having that kind of sprinkle of crazy as a startup founder that you need to have is that, if you look at something like Uber or Airbnb, everybody effed them off in the beginning because nobody's gonna go into a random car with nobody they know, just from an app.
Yeah.
Or even more so, go to somebody's house that you've never met and just leap in their room randomly, right? Very little people believed in them, but they had to be crazy enough. They had to be persistent enough and passionate enough to actually get to where they are right now and today.
Yeah.
So it's definitely hard, and sort of there will always be something that will go wrong throughout the journey. So if you don't have that, you'll go into a really dark place very quickly, basically. In terms of kind of building a team and kind of whether it's employing people or having a founding team, it's interesting that you said I'd never basically start my own startup because I wouldn't like to do these XYZ things.
Well, also, in my head at the moment, I don't have an amazing idea that I think would be great.
Yeah. And that's exactly, I think, the thing. So, as entrepreneurs, usually what happens is you don't think of an idea first and then kind of try to make it. You go like, right, I'm going to do something. I know I'm gonna need these type of people. Let's think of another idea now. Let's research the market. Let's see what's out there.
Okay, yeah.
I think too many times people are too precious about having an amazingly new idea, right? In reality, it's not necessarily making something completely new.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's improving what's out there already. So again, Uber, right? They looked at how taxis work, they improved it. Airbnb, they looked at how hotels work, they improved it, right? It's nothing that's completely out there, completely new. I mean, you could say that something like, Snapchat was a completely different way of communicating and a completely different way of attacking the social media aspect of it, right? So that is the hardest thing kind of to do, right? But most of the time is just looking at the market and seeing, right, which ones really need to be updated, essentially.
Yeah.
And at the moment, if you look at trends, it's banking. It's how you get a mortgage, how you get a business account, and all, how do you track expenses? Everybody kind of tries to go not necessarily away from banks, but everybody sees that there's definitely been a certain way of doing things for a very long time, and people are kind of desperate for innovation.
Yeah.
And that's why I think team is just so important, because I feel like for a successful startup, or at least to go through those stages, you need to have those specific pillars. And I've actually noted them down, because from experience, I kind of noticed what really is needed. And one person can be multiple things.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to go through the list, and
Okay.
I'm curious to see what you think. So the first one I've got is basically you need the genius. All right. So somebody that's usually responsible for building something, whether it's a tech product, whether it's a physical product, whatever it may be, you need that person that's different and that's literally so super smart that whatever he's gonna create, most other people could not replicate, right?
Okay.
So in our case, that's our lead developer, right?
I thought you were going to say you.
There's no way that's me. There is no way that's me. So that's Lee, our lead developer. He's solely focused on building the product.
Yeah.
He's always going to be looking at new, innovative ways to actually develop it in a way that maybe others haven't. Just the fact that we are developing an app in a language that most others are not is based on that, right? So you definitely need that person.
Okay.
The second one I've got is you need the dreamer motivator. So the one that doesn't really care about the day-to-day, doesn't really care about how it's actually going to happen. He just knows the long-term vision, the big goal, and uses that to motivate the whole team. So that's usually one of the kind of front-facing founders that goes out doing the speaking gigs, going in front of the social medias and the newspapers, stuff like that. So you need the rah-rah guy, basically, right?
And that's you.
That's me, but it doesn't come naturally.
Okay.
I personally don't think that I'm a great motivator.
Okay.
And while I have like vision and a dream, I struggle to maybe communicate that in a way that maybe some others would do very enthusiastically. And I think this is kind of a bit of a Eastern European thing in me, where we're not really very much out there like that, right?
Yeah.
But as I say, one person can do multiple things, and some things might need to be learned, and some things will come naturally to you. So the motivated dreamer thing doesn't come naturally to me. But that's something I kind of throughout the years have worked on, because I feel like that's something that's needed, essentially. The third one I've got is you need basically the numbers guy. So the one that will do the financials, the analytics, the projections, pricing and all that stuff, right?
Okay.
So somebody that absolutely loves numbers, loves Excel sheets. And that's, for example, that's probably my biggest downside. Unless it comes to like money, then it's fine, right? I can do the high level stuff, right? But when it comes to especially like the nitty gritty analytics and doing the big charts and stuff like that, my brain just turns off, right? Mm-hmm. So I definitely know I have to have a team member within the startup that actually not only is good at it, but actually has a passion for it and actually is good at it. So I've got a couple more. You need a hustler, which is essentially a really well articulated person that mostly does sales.
Okay.
So that's the guy that goes to every meetup, every conference, goes to coffee shops, talks to everybody, stops people on the streets, goes and does like A/B testing and all those type of things. So it's just always out, always about, right? And just spreading the word and then just trying to get those sales in and the brand out, right? Then you need a leader. So I think every startup, even if you say there's 3 founders and you all have like equal equity and stuff like that, I think you still need a very clear leader within that team, right? Somebody that everybody will look to make that tough decision, to decide on what's gonna be done next, and just overall like somebody that people will follow naturally. And I think that is more something that, it can be learned, but it's better if it comes a bit more natural. So that's probably one of the toughest things, because most, especially tech startups, are made of fairly introverted people. So, for example, for me, it was a bit easier because I always liked leading, whether it was at university, at school, in the basketball team or whatever it may be.
Okay.
But at the same time, I felt like I always need to learn more, because it's completely different when you're within a team, right? So the 6th one is, I think, a lot of times overlooked, but you do need like the design and the branding guy, right? I see actually a lot of startups either waste a lot of money or actually fail because they might even create a fairly great product, but people won't pay attention or won't care about it if the branding's not great, if it doesn't look slick, it doesn't look good. Like, I think we've reached a point now and basically in 2020 where people's expectations of things looking absolutely great is very high, whereas before it wasn't as much. Imagine you open up an app and it looks shite.
Yeah.
It might be a great app, but most likely you'll turn it off, right? Because it looks dodgy, it looks like it might be spammy and stuff like that. It looks too early, right? Where if you got a great UI and UX experience, right? You might be a very early startup with a lot of bugs and stuff like that, but people will give you more of a chance, and maybe have more patience to actually try it out and maybe recommend it to somebody else because they like to be associated with something like that.
On to the roles of a startup that you just made. So our startup, our podcast is Startup Dynamics. So it's the point of view of the founder and the employee. Yeah. And the founder and the founder and the employee weren't in that list.
Yeah.
And when I tell people, when people ask me what I do, I find it quite hard to give my job role.
Right.
And even when you were explaining that there, it was hard to put my role into a category.
Right.
So I guess from my point of view, my job role is I do marketing, but also the social media, a bit of copywriting and journalism, and then also editing, recently getting in front of the camera, but also getting behind the camera. Yeah. And I think I'm not trying to big myself up. That's just kind of the bits and pieces I do for the company. But when trying to put that into a specific job role, it's quite hard to do.
So the roles that I just went through, they're more of a mindset and a characteristic point of view. Yeah. It's not necessarily saying, that the dreamer is going to be doing social media, right?
It's like a BuzzFeed, which are
essentially,
you?
But I think that kind of helps because you have these sort of labels, and and for example, that if that's a dreamer and a motivator, right? You're not going to ask him to do an Excel sheet because that's just not going to work, right? It doesn't matter what his role within the company is, but at the same time it does, because you wouldn't assign stuff that wouldn't suit him or her, right?
Yeah.
Now, regarding the actual roles, that's an interesting point, because I have personally went through quite a bit about assigning specific roles and kind of leaving it quite open as a founder. So in the very beginning, I just said, put your own role on there. So when I would give it a contract, the role would be empty, and the employee that we would hire would have to put it in themselves.
Okay.
And so from my perspective, I thought kind of giving that freedom and flexibility for them to either be or become whatever they want.
Yeah.
And full transparency, that completely backfired. Solely because what we realized is an employee a lot of times needs that at least initial direction.
Yeah.
To see, right, this is my place within the ecosystem, and it's our job then to make them know that this is your starting point.
Yeah.
And making it clear that you can grow out from that into whatever, rather than go, just be whatever, right?
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, what we've seen is if you employ somebody and you just say, right, you're just doing copywriting, right? You're a copywriter, right? If I come to that person in a few months' time and say, oh, can you look after, social media or something like that?
Yeah.
That person will be, depending obviously on the person, but that's not what they signed up for, right? So they might be either disappointed or they could be, other way around. They could be actually excited that they'll do something else. But if you make it very clear that you're hired to do one job and do it well within the company, and then asking them to do something completely different later on, that again might backfire, right? And it has in our case as well. So it is a very fine line to kind of how you define those roles. So at the moment, and obviously this is where your perspective is very, very interesting. When we hired you, we did define what the role is, right? But I tried to make it as clear as possible that is just the kind of starting point.
Yeah.
And that at the end of the day, we all have to be all-rounders.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we would need, at least 20 employees, which we can't do, right? And one of the questions I remember I asked you in the interview is like, whilst you might need to do these 5, 6 completely different things, I need to clearly know, and you need to fairly clearly know, what is your dream role, right? Whether it's this company or whatever other company, like where do you want to go to, right? Because then we can support that growth. So as we grow and say, right, you absolutely hate writing, so we need to hire then a copywriter at some point, so that's out of your job, so you can do more video production or something like that, right? So from your perspective, when you joined, because you do quite a few things right now, right? How clear was it, and what were your expectations coming in when I kind of presented it in that way?
I think from my point of view, especially the interview, there were these it was an all-rounder, but there were these 3 roles which kind of had the potential to go further in, it was copywriting, writing blogs and that, social media work, and then kind of the design, editing, camera work. So they were the 3 routes. I think when during the interview, I was kind of leaning more into the social media kind of side of it. Just from my point of view, as someone who is quite young, most of my life has been absorbed by social media. So I feel like anyone my age has a pretty good grasp of how to do well in social media.
Yeah.
As we've gone further along, and to kind of now, I've gone towards kind of the marketing side. So the reaching out to people, trying to help the brand, gaining traction channels. For me, there's only so much you can learn about social media, whereas there's a lot you can learn about marketing.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And sort of once you start asking those type of questions, then it's easier to allocate you to one of those six characteristics, right? So from my perspective, when you just joined in, you were basically a bit of a numbers guy. So not necessarily the Excel sheets or anything like that, but I felt like you're very attentive to detail.
Yeah.
And kind of really care about the nitty gritty. And then the hustler, right? Because you were from previous employers I spoke to before we interviewed, from speaking with you overall, and from, when, we gave you like a test task and stuff like that. Just from seeing that, like you put in that extra effort and extra work that some other people just wouldn't. And that proved to be true. Like, you're doing a lot of extra that's not even asked of you, but you feel that that's what supports the startup going forward. And that is the hustler, just not from a sales perspective, but from your marketing perspective.
I don't think in any other job apart from a startup, you'd be asked to kind of come and get in front of a camera and do a podcast.
Well, that's what we're trying to do, isn't it? We're trying to do different.
Yeah, but I think that's exactly what I want. To kind of do stuff that maybe I might not be comfortable doing, but I know it's an experience to do, and it will ultimately make me kind of improve my skill sets. That kind of thing.
Cool. So I think we've covered quite a few things here. I'd be really curious to hear from anybody that went through the same thing, whether it's founders or employees, what kind of characteristics or what kind of mindset you need to have to either start or join a startup. What are you looking for when you're actually employing somebody? Reach out to us. Whether it's Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, you'll have all the links there. Suggest any topics that you'd like us to cover from the two perspectives. This is what Startup Dynamics is all about, and we'll see you in the next episode.